Hi everyone! In this video, I'll walk you through the SharePoint to Azure AI Search Connector Accelerator, which can be used to overcome limitations on the Copilot Studio SharePoint connector as listed. And on the SharePoint connector of Azure AI Search in preview. It's a push connector that keeps an Azure AI Search index in sync with a selected SharePoint site or a specific folder and wires that index into a Copilot Studio agent. The accelerator also handles multimodal content, handling text and images in the same retrieval. It propagates file status changes from the source, supports large files, manages rate limits, and runs nightly backups. By the end, you'll understand the architecture, know how to deploy it, and see it working end-to-end. Let me walk you through the architecture. There are two main flows, the ingestion pipeline at the top and the retrieval flow at the bottom. On the left is SharePoint Online. We point the connector at one site, one library, or even one folder inside a library. Least privilege access is enforced using graph sites. Selected permission, where we grant the function app's managed identity read access on the selected site only. The ingestion pipeline is queue-fed. Every hour, a timer-triggered dispatcher asks Graph's Delta endpoint what's changed since the last run, including deletions. For each new or modified file, it enqueues one message on the queue. For each deleted file, it removes the corresponding chunks from the search index immediately. The per-drive Delta token gets persisted, so the next run picks up where this one left off. Queue-triggered workers scale out independently, up to 40 instances. Each worker takes one message, streams the file to a temporary file, so we stay memory-bounded even on 500-megabyte PDFs, routes it through extraction, chunks the content, and embeds every chunk. Extraction has two routes. If Azure AI Document Intelligence is configured, PDFs and Office files go through its pre-built layout model. That gives us reading order paragraphs, tables, and figures with cropped image bytes and bounding polygons. Standalone image files and plain text formats use simpler paths. Embedding is the unified multimodal part. Every chunk, whether text or image, goes through Azure AI Vision multimodal embeddings, the Florence model. It produces 1,024-dimensional vectors that live in the same vector space for both modalities. That means a text query like our Q3 revenue chart can match the slide containing the chart, not just text that mentions Q3. The index itself has one vector field called content embedding. Each chunk carries content text, a flag for whether it has an image, and location metadata such as page number and bounding polygon. We also store image crops in a dedicated blob container, so Copilot Studio can render them as citation thumbnails. At the bottom, the retrieval flow. A Copilot Studio agent connects directly to the AI Search Index using its built-in Azure AI Search Knowledge Source connector. Copilot Studio runs hybrid queries. That's vector plus keyword, with the semantic ranker against the SharePoint index. The language model grounds its answers on the returned chunks, with citations back to the SharePoint source files. Let's move to the deployment. For the default deployment, you need a SharePoint Online site with documents in it and an admin account to grant the function app's managed identity per site read access after deployment. Next, you need an Azure subscription where you hold required privilege on the target resource group. Lastly, a Copilot Studio environment with the Environment Maker role to add the AI Search Index as a knowledge source on your agent. To run the post-deployment script, the SharePoint admin's workstation will need Azure CLI and PowerShell 7. Let's start the deployment. The fastest path is the Deploy to Azure button. The template asks for key values for deployment. Firstly, the subscription and resource group. Then a base name like a short prefix. The template then needs a 30 SharePoint site URL where documents will be stored. The template provides an optional additional components to set up if you want to enable security trimming per user access. For this feature, you can provide an app registration ID created earlier. Click Review and Create. Deployment takes about 5 minutes. Behind the scenes, it creates all listed Azure resources, managed identities, and every RBAC role assignment required. It also provisions the AI Search Index schema. Lastly, it pulls the latest CI-built Function app package from GitHub releases and pushes it through the Flex Publish endpoint, so the code is registered and running by the time the deployment finishes. Let's check the resources created. Firstly, check the Azure Function if you can see those functions showing up. Copy the name of the resource. We will use this in post-deployment step. Secondly, check the storage account resource if you can see the tables and queues created under the storage account. Lastly, check the AI Search resource if you can see the index created on AI Search. Let's run the mandatory manual post-deployment step, separated from the template for elevated privileged account to execute. This step will grant the Azure Functions managed identity read access across our target site. This requires SharePoint Administrator or Global Administrator, and it uses the Microsoft Graph PowerShell SDK. Open a PowerShell 7 window. Go to your cloned repository folder. Then run the grant site permission script with your site URL and function app name. The script auto-installs the 2 Graph submodules if missing, and it completes with the permission granted. Now, we're ready to wire up Copilot Studio. In the Copilot Studio, we will create a new agent with the built-in prompt capability to create a new agent. After the agent is initialized, we will firstly turn off the web data grounding setting so that the agent is not grounded with web data. Similarly, we will turn off the use ungrounded knowledge to not use the model knowledge to answer questions. Let's add our Azure AI Search as a knowledge base. Create a new connection. Provide the Azure AI Search endpoint and the key that you copy from the resource. Select the SharePoint index. The agent is now ready to retrieve the grounded chunks from the connected Azure AI Search. Let's move on to testing. If you don't already have SharePoint content to test with, you can utilize the files in Azure Search Sample Data Repository on GitHub. To process all the files in the target site, change the processing mode from iterative to full. Now you can trigger a one-off run by firing the dispatcher via PowerShell or waiting the timer to run. The dispatcher calls Graph's Delta endpoint, finds the files, and enqueues one message per file onto the indexer queue. Workers scale out and process them in parallel. Stream download, document intelligence layout extraction, multimodal embedding, push to AI search. To verify, go to the Search Service, then Search Explorer, and run a wildcard query against the SharePoint index. You'll see chunk ID, parent ID, title, source URL, the content text, and the content embedding vector. You can also run your prompt to see the chunks returned for grounding. Let's test the agent. Ask it a question whose answer is in one of the indexed PDFs. For example, what is the role of Chief Finance Officer? The agent responds with a grounded answer and a citation pointing back to the SharePoint file URL. Click the citation. SharePoint opens the file with its own permission check. That's the SharePoint to Azure AI Search Connector. You can find more details on README file. Thanks for watching.